All right. Well, thanks everybody for making it to this little impromptu. Well, not I guess impromptu. It was 2 weeks. It feels like it was just the other day that we scheduled all of this. But so I'm not going to take too much time talking right here because I know you guys have a presentation to give to us, and we have a tight timeline because I know you have another meeting after this at 6:30. So I don't want to chew up air and space. So I will hand it right over to you all because I think Bill and Brian, you all have a good sense of kind of why we're here, right? Somewhat. All right, Rami, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Thank you all for agreeing to meet with us today. We're going to show you a quick, well, as quick as we can make it, a presentation that will sort of culminate the first phase of the plan. We'll talk a little bit about where we think we're heading, and then sort of open it up for some discussion and suggestions. Brett, are you driving? Can I ask you to next? So we'll briefly introduce ourselves for those of you who don't know us, but I think everyone here does. So we'll just skip through that as quickly as possible and then go through the key findings and talk about next steps. So we are Over Under. We're a architecture and urban design and graphic design firm. We do everything from kind of downtown plans to wayfinding and signage, graphics, and sort of pop-up design for a pop-up in New Bedford. These are just 3 recent projects we've done in the Commonwealth. Next, please. I'll let Fotini start the key findings.
So yeah, what we're going to discuss in the next section are things that we've discovered about Ashburnham in the first phase of the Rapid Recovery Plan. These are probably mostly things you already know, but that were important for us to gain an understanding of your community. We've gathered this information in various ways, either through communication with this commission, with members of the select board and the town administrator, and through an online business survey, through physical observation, and through research using GIS data and census and other data. Next. So the first findings we'll present are about demographics. Population by age, so more than a quarter of the town population is under 19 years old. Next. Ashburnham has a predominantly white population. Next. And approximately 35% of all adults has a post-secondary degree. The next section is about findings about the physical environment, and some of these observations are also accompanied by things that we've heard from you. So the village center has a beautiful building stock, both in terms of housing, but also some of the civic buildings. Next. As we heard from you, living in Ashburnham means easy access to nature and proximity to natural attractions like trails and lakes. Next. Institutions like Cushing Academy and the Piano Museum are an important asset for Ashburnham. And partly thanks to these institutions, the village center has a number of niche businesses such as the sushi place and creative connections. Moving on to some of the challenges that the village center is facing, the lack of publicly owned parking and some zoning restrictions make parking a challenge for businesses and their customers. Next. Some areas of the village center are unsafe for pedestrians, mainly due to strip mall style parking in front of businesses, a few of the businesses, and inconsistent sidewalks. Another challenge is both the some restrictive zoning regulations and lack of clarity in the permitting processes can be impediment to growth of the commercial tax base in Ashburnham. Finally, another challenge is that there's no programmatic anchor currently in the village center. There's a farmer's market, but it's located outside of the study area at Meeting House Hill. And the next slides are about responses to the online survey, which was filled out by 9 out of the 31 businesses in the village center. So businesses seem to be overall satisfied with safety and comfort for their customers and the proximity to complementary businesses. They're moderately satisfied with the condition of buildings and access for customers, and they're least satisfied with the condition of public spaces. And something else to note is that 25% of businesses indicated that parking regulations can be an obstacle to their operation. Next. Again, from the survey, these are some of the potential strategies that were given to businesses. And it seems that public parking availability and improvement of public spaces, again, are very important for Ashburnham businesses, while safety and cleanliness and the renovation of storefronts and facades and improvement of transit and bike and amenities for bike users are moderately important. And with that, I hand it over to Ray to talk about the business environment.
Everyone. So this is just a continuation of what Fotini was talking about, but more specific to the businesses themselves. So some of this is information we've collected from observation, but a bit more of it is from the survey again. Again, some of these things are probably things you already know, but just to lay it out so that we understand, the context in which we're working. About almost half the businesses are service-related businesses, and almost a third are retail. So I think that's just important to note when we think about some of the strategies that we might be implementing to help these businesses, or whether or not, this is the right proportion of types of businesses that you all are hoping for in the downtown. As expected, COVID had a huge impact on these businesses. And I should say, 9 out of 31 businesses filled out the survey, which thanks to Kirby, we were able to get a pretty decent percentage. And I think the fact that these businesses cared enough to fill this out shows that, I think they're probably a good reflection of the overall environment, but of course there are other businesses that this may or may not apply to. Going back to this, so 44% of businesses generate less revenue, and 22% had fewer customers than before COVID. But I think that's something we all knew, but useful to have the actual data representing that. One section of the business survey which we found interesting was a very general list of some proposed strategies and asking businesses how they would rate them in terms of importance. So while there wasn't an overwhelming opinion, we'd say that it seemed like the most important for the businesses are these cultural events and activities to bring people to the district, and also recruitment programs for new businesses. Somewhat moderately important were also outdoor dining and marketing strategies for all the retail businesses together. And also they rated some changes to zoning or creation of a district management entity as less important. So I think just as a barometer of where things are in terms of interest, these are enormously helpful. And then again, while this is not an overwhelming majority of people, only 22% of these businesses express interest, but there is some interest in low-cost financing for storefront improvements. And then sort of the last part of this data gathering section is just administrative capacity. Again, things that you all probably know already. I won't necessarily go through all of these, but obviously your capacity is limited. You know, there's no town planner. Capacity for business associations and a directory is low. And as someone expressed to us early on in our conversations, you know, you can show up with an idea for business and not have people there to help you just because the capacity is slow. So important to make a note of this, but again, something that I think is clear to everyone at this point. And then I'm just going to turn it back to Rami to talk a bit more about next steps in terms of schedule for these phases. And we're also going to follow up with an early iteration of some of our proposed strategies, which I think will probably be the most of the discussion.
So I should just step back for a second and say, you know, this is sort of a draft of our findings. It could be that we have gotten things wrong or misinterpreted things. If you feel that we have, please reach out and express yourself. Don't be shy. That's not uncommon for us to sort of misread a situation, or if you feel differently, or there are things that need to be added to what we have included in the diagnostics. Please let us know. Effectively, we're sort of, you know, this presentation and then the feedback that we receive from you sort of represents the end of phase one, which these phases are sort of set up by the state in terms of how we proceed, and it's been fairly helpful as this project evolves to have the state's phases. And effectively, we're sort of at the end of phase one. Truthfully, we're sort of into phase two already. And phase two is where we make a long list of potential projects that the town, that would sort of help the town move forward. Interestingly, we just had a conversation today with folks at the state that because this is sort of a pandemic related response, and the sort of the funding for this effort and for the sort of the project lists to fund the project list that we come up with is coming from these have to be sort of identified as pandemic recovery related projects. They can be long-term, but they really have to be about something that's sort of emerged from the pandemic. And that could include, for example, an increased desire among town residents to shop locally and to walk there, right? But it somehow has to be tied to this idea of the pandemic, which is fine. So I'm just sort of bringing that to your attention because it's really just come to our attention as well. But it's worth noting. So this sort of what we'll do in this phase 2 is sort of a long list of project recommendations that we will vet with you and at a public meeting, hopefully sometime in July or early August, sort of a community meeting. Then with that feedback, we'll come back in the final phase and sort of coordinate that list and sort of whittle it down to a smaller group of projects and present a final plan. I should back up and just say that in phase 2, we will be working with what are called SMEs, the subject matter experts, and the size of our, thank you, Brett, the size of our project gives us access to 3 SMEs. We believe a transportation planner or engineer is key. Some sort of economic development consultant is also key. The last one we have a few questions about and would love to discuss with you. I think personally, perhaps an event manager or program consultant, someone who sort of is, can think about that aspect of things, but maybe there's something we haven't sort of thought about yet. The public presentation I referred to optimally would be at the end of July, beginning of August. And from that, we've sort of whittled down this, create a long list and then kind of present it and then get approval on a shorter list probably. Next, please. The list of projects that this is the state's language on this slide is sort of, they put it into these 6 categories. The sort of public realm, and that can include transportation or infrastructure planning strategies, but also, placemaking, landscape architecture strategies as well. But also, so that's the first category. The second category is what they refer to as the private realm, which has to do with redevelopment and private investment. The third is revenue and sales, which could include sort of marketing campaigns, increased promotion to get people to existing businesses. The fourth would be about expanding or amending sort of administrative capacity, whether that's looking at land use policies, zoning, regs, et cetera, or strategies for assistance for small businesses. The fifth category is the tenant mix. Do you have the sorts of businesses you're looking for in the village center? And the final sixth category is sort of cultural and arts organizations. And I would suggest that for you, that's actually quite, that's really one of your assets. And I think you can make a strong argument for ways in which that can bolster the events that happen. I mean, you already have events that happen around the piano collection, for example, but sort of cultural and arts as a way forward seems like quite an interesting option for you as well. Next, please. What follows is a list of a kind of what we as a group have kind of brainstormed based on our discussions with you and our findings. And we are, so the next 4 slides are really a preview of what we think this list is going to include. And again, please tell us to get out of town or to add to it, but that please regard this as very much a work in progress. But I would say, for all communities, yours is no exception, that there were some, the pandemic did not affect everyone equally. And some businesses are going to need more immediate support than others. And I think identifying those and finding ways in which they can receive funding, if that's an option, and it still is for many places, particularly restaurants. The other is to continue to make outdoor dining and selling easier. We did this on a temporary basis during the pandemic, but perhaps there are ways to think of extending that as we move forward. So those are sort of immediate kind of things to consider, I would argue. Sort of perhaps longer term, but equally important thing for the town to work through is to kind of establish and to a certain extent kind of come to a consensus on what the village center's identity is, define its characteristics, and then set what we would call a kind of hierarchy of priorities around that. And the reason I'm suggesting this is it can then allow you, so as you move forward and make other decisions, you can go back and say, all right, do these fit in the character we are or desire to be? And where is it along in the priority of things we wish to be? For example, I'm just giving you an example, not necessarily for Ashburnham, but we were talking to someone recently who had done years of planning in Copenhagen, Denmark, where after a long time, it's now a sort of very pedestrian and bike friendly place. And that was because the city early on sort of agreed that pedestrians come first, then bicycles, then cars, and all decisions were sort of filtered through that hierarchy of priorities. I'm not suggesting that that's the appropriate set of priorities for everywhere, but it's at least a clear way to move forward. Next, please. I do think, regardless of where it falls along your set of hierarchies, improving pedestrian safety is a no-brainer in the downtown. You have what we would call great bones. You have a center. It is very clear where the center is. It's potentially very walkable, and there are places where a block or half a block at a stretch, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, where it is walkable, but there are other places where that walkability just falls apart. There are two sort of issues with that that have to do with speed of cars that come through, and that I think is a key piece of it. I think this can be probably addressed with sort of signage, so it's clear sets of signs as you're coming in from the east and west, from the north and south, that you're entering the city. The town center, that you have, that the speed limit is set to what it is now, or I think there's room to consider lowering it. Regardless, you could certainly enforce the speed limits on a temporary basis. I understand now it's not enforced until 40 miles per hour. So if you spend a few weeks enforcing it with the right campaign, an awareness campaign around it, that would slow traffic down, and will we'll want to talk to a subject matter expert to sort of guide us on the specifics of that, but that definitely seems like something that is possible and certainly has been tried and works in other places. We would look to the SME to help us to see whether curb cuts and signage on Main Street proper makes sense. And whether, you know, what sort of temporary strategies we could start with. Next, please. If it is a desire to bring new businesses to the village center, I would suggest you identify the ones that you want, need, find ways to recruit them, either through marketing, word of mouth, and creating a sort of business-friendly town hall. We don't mean to say that you're not business-friendly, but it's really just a question of how to connect the pieces. Identify what is possible, right? So the distance between what you want and what you can have needs to be clear, I think, before you begin. And then streamline to the best. I know this is already underway. Streamline to the best of your abilities the zoning and permitting process. And then finally, sort of altogether involved in that would rework messaging around that effort. Next, please. So in addition to attracting businesses, you obviously would want to attract visitors to the village center. As we said, we think you have great bones. You have some very interesting stores, businesses already. There are some wonderful outdoor spaces. However, you know, there are certainly businesses that could consider improving their storefronts. There are places where the internal layout is a little confusing. And the sort of approach to the street is not necessarily conducive for the sort of walkable main street that we believe you want. In addition, we think that event programming, you know, sort of using things it's a combination of using what you have, adding a little bit to it, and then kind of connecting them in interesting ways. And one of the things we thought of, for example, we understand that the piano concerts will be moved, or will take place rather in the church, right, or the new arts center, which is fantastic. Is it possible to sort of pipe that music into other parts of the downtown? So, for example, you could, you know, maybe it's hard to convince a 7-year-old to go to listen to a piano concert, but they might be convinced to do it if they could play on the playground at the same time. And then finally, something we think that you're quite close to is connecting the rail trail to the town. You're really not very far, especially if the DPW site is in play. We can talk about that a little bit further later. And then sort of through signage, kind of connect that, you know, make it known that you can walk from throughout the trail and sort of end or begin in the village center. Next, please. So we did speak with Eric Halverson, who we know from other work. We had a chat with him about the work he's been doing with Ashburnham, particularly around the DPW site. It seems to me that you guys are sort of, at the time we spoke, it wasn't quite clear what the decisions you were going to make were, but we at least knew the possibilities. So we're interested to hear about that. But we think that is, as I'm sure you do, I think that's quite an interesting development, and has the potential to really sort of, if you kind of understand what the impact of that will be on the village center, you know, versus the footfall, but also the tax base, the increased desire and need to use the main street as a place to recreate, to eat, etc. We think that it should be sort of baked into whatever happens with that sizable property, sort of baked in the connections both to the rail trail, but also connecting the rail trail to the main street, are sort of part of the guidelines that would be given to a developer as they move that forward. And I believe that's it. Yeah. So these are all, this is a very, quick and rough. This is not finalized in any way. The next time we would present these, they would include, drawings, images, perspectives, photographs of things that precedents of things that have been done in other places, but also our own drawings of things that we could imagine how this could happen for Ashburnham. And I suppose at this point, we're open to questions and or comments.
Rami, Phil Papusian here. I have a question. Thank you for an excellent presentation. I'm a member of the Economic Development Commission. How would the assessment of a business be conducted to determine whether or not they are cash strapped?
That's a fair question, and I can't answer that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll work with some.
Okay.
I mean, I think you, and I don't know how to measure this, but it's pretty clear that restaurants have really struggled, for example. And they have, they're going to stay in business. I think they're going to need to, well, they're going to need financial support, and there is from what we understand, there is financial support out there specifically for restaurants and bars from the state, for example.
I would think that some sort of a cash flow analysis, maybe going back a couple of years and then pro forma moving forward, would be appropriate.
So, I mean, I can tell you, for example, we applied for and received the PPP loans, both the first and second time, and it kept our doors open. It allowed us to keep all our employees, and we had to submit exactly as you suggest. We had to submit our last few years of tax returns and prove that we were now, not doing as well. So,
Thank you.
The only thing that I'd like to bring up once again, when you're talking about your subject matter experts, our problem on parking might be due somewhat to regulations, but really it's the physical space that we have available in the town center within walking. That's what's really restricting us. So I don't know, maybe you can help us with that or give us alternatives. As far as a mixture of businesses, one I'd like to see, or that has been brought up constantly, is a breakfast type of restaurant or a coffee shop, something that would attract visitors to the town center. So those two things I think we should focus on.
sorry, I'm listening. I'm taking notes.
Okay, that's
No, I think those are great. With respect to the parking, it's an interesting one. If you look just at all the parking that's downtown, you actually have plenty. It's just very little of it is owned by the town. Very little of it is truly public parking, and that's the crux of the matter. And I don't know quite how to unlock that one for you. But
well, you did bring up an interesting point when you're talking about the traffic flow through the center of town. That's a main state road. There's a lot of traffic, heavy trucks coming by Creative Connections. We've got vehicles on both sides of the road. That is a dangerous section for people to try to cross. So,
Yeah, it certainly is. We witnessed it on more than one occasion. I do believe that traffic can be slowed down, and that other places have done it. It's a not insurmountable problem. Like it can be, and I'm hoping that a transportation planner will sort of help us kind of come up with the sort of the best toolkit for your particular set of needs in that regard. I'm looking at
Erica's question.
Erica's question. You know, given the number of businesses and the number that responded, it's roughly a third of the businesses that responded, and that's you know, that's better than other places in terms of a response. I have to say, but I don't, you know, I can't speak to how reliable that is. You know, we have offered and would offer to you to speak to any business that would like to speak with us. We would be happy to kind of have sort of one-on-one interviews with those folks. You know, that's actually been very useful in other places, but you know, we've done that in places with far lower responses than yours, but happy to do it if you think that's useful.
Do we know why the response rate was, well, why people didn't respond?
Bill, I can talk a little bit to that, just in
Oh, okay.
the fact that I was the one that had most of the email
Yeah.
with these folks. So even though there's 31 businesses, quote unquote, that were listed for our downtown like business footprint, number of those businesses aren't what you would think of as folks that could even really respond to this survey in a lot of ways with the questions that were being asked.
Oh, okay.
So I think that's kind of important to take into consideration. And the survey was obviously anonymous for a lot of reasons, so that folks could feel free to share the responses that they did. I would say based on like the responses I got back from folks in terms of people asking questions, navigating and saying like, yep, filling this out for you tomorrow. You know, I think we hit most of the business types downtown that we have. So, you know, I would hope that this is somewhat representative of what's down there. I was hoping that we were going to get about 12 to 15 folks, because if we got 12 to 15, I feel like we would hit kind of all of the businesses that are open to the public in the downtown that really are kind of the fabric down there. You know, and there were a few folks that didn't get to the survey in time before it closed because the state had its timeline as well. So, but I think that's a little bit helpful just for folks to know that there was a lot of back and forth and lots of people calling me, asking questions about stuff. So it was nice to have some interface with those folks too.
Thank you, Kirby.
Rami, I don't know if I shared with you the unbranded results of the guided discussion that was done over the course of 1 year. It's old. I'm not going to say it was recent. I don't know whether or not that's something you had the opportunity to look at to see if perhaps you got some more information, because we got most of the people downtown. Definitely far more than 9. So I don't know if that would be helpful if you haven't had a chance to look at it, or maybe it wasn't helpful at all.
So Tina, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, we have it. We haven't had the chance to look at it, to be honest.
I remember, look, you did mention it to us, I think the last time we spoke, Rosemary, and I remember looking at it at the time. Was it 2009?
2018.
Oh,
So
okay.
it was a while ago, but the
Something
themes,
else.
The themes keep coming up over and over again. Nothing's really changed except for the pandemic. But, you know, it's not one-to-one with the business survey, but it might be able to give you a little bit more of an idea if there's a business that we missed, for example, that isn't captured, a business type, you might be able to glean that from it. It was anonymous as well. I mean, I'm pretty much the only person who knows who did what because I conducted the interviews. But yeah, so you know, hey, it might be worth just taking a quick peek at, but it's really, people were pretty brutal, I'll be honest with you. And very brutal in talking about other businesses downtown. That's why it's unbranded.
I think too, for folks to know about the survey as well, is it did have a very heavy COVID focus in it, because this is funding that comes from COVID. And so I totally appreciate you, Rami, talking about that at the beginning. In my day job with the state, we're doing a lot of this dance of like, we've got these dollars that have to be attached to COVID in ways, but we're trying to figure out how to make them work as kind of long-term infrastructure building projects that touch on the things that came up in COVID, but also are supporting moving forward. And, you know, there is a lot of dollars that are going to be rolling from the state level around this. So I do think it behooves us to have that mindset with some of this stuff moving forward too, as opportunities arise.
The stuff that I'm thinking about, Kirby, that's in the guided discussion is when you're talking about village center identity, that's included in there.
Yes.
So that would be something that was definitely discussed, the mix of businesses that people would like to see. That's something that's discussed in there as well. And certainly discussion about walkability or ease of starting a business, you know, zoning and bylaw stuff, that's discussed as well, probably in more detail.
Do you feel certainly we'll look at that in greater depth, but do you feel that we are missing or off on any of as a result?
No, I mean, it might give you a better idea as to, you know, what people value about the downtown. The historic nature of it is pretty significant. You know, they use the word quaint, but the historic piece is really what they're talking about. Definitely you know, attracting tourism. And, you know, cultural and arts is part of that, but it's also attracting people to participate in the open space and recreation. And in the mix of businesses, what's lacking, how businesses can improve. And that's another thing with an SME. I do think that we have good bones, and I do think that we have some of the requisite businesses that people are looking for. But if you're trying to change the image, something that's going to get people to stop, you know, the storefront, the facades, there are business owners that probably don't even know what we're talking about. They need direction. They need guidance. They don't understand, you know, what they can do to attract people into their store necessarily, or their business.
Yeah, I mean, we've worked in other places in the state with mass development, and one of the things they do is they have provided kind of these technical assistance programs that are literally sort of someone will go into stores and sort of work with the store owner to make suggestions about window, you know, shop front, what to put in your window. How to think about the store in ways that make it easier for people who don't know what you sell to come in and to sort of navigate the store without feeling intimidated or confused. And sometimes when you're a business owner, especially a small business owner, I can tell you from experience, you're just trying to keep things, you know, afloat or moving, and you don't necessarily have the time or the the experience for sort of thinking about how this works. And there are people who do this for a living, and you can get access to those people in the coming months and years. So that's just one small example.
Right, that's what I'm talking about. You know the businesses, we talked about them when we met. A couple of them, you wouldn't even know that one business even offers this item, but it's pretty important. And when you talk about attracting cyclists, which we have a number of cyclists who come down in the on the weekends, if they knew that one particular business actually had sandwiches available instead of just ice cream and liquor, they'd probably be in there, but they don't know because there's nothing that says that it's available there.
I want to make sure other folks can chime in if you have thoughts. One thing I do want to just make sure, I think as we're moving forward and thinking about these plans, I think the bigger aspirational stuff is great, and the things that we're going to have to go after some grant funds is great. But I also want to make sure that we have some smaller action items that are things that we can take on and actually have some impact on in the community, things that are realistic within kind of our scope in terms of the fact that we are limited with our resources. But I think there are some kind of low-hanging fruit things that are out there that we could do. And so I just want to make sure that we've got some of that included in this as well, so that both the Economic Development Commission and other boards and committees in town, if they feel so behooved and passionate about it, could pick up some of these recommendations and put some hours into making them happen.
No, I think that's a good point. And I would just say, I think, incremental change is often the more powerful. I mean, you can wait until the big plan is funded and enacted, but you can also do the little things that sort of build up to something larger. And that is often more effective because it builds a track record and experience and the ability to demonstrate that you've done things, and then people will be more willing to give you funding for more bigger things, and etc. So yeah.
I mean, I'm just realistic, and the reality is that we'll apply for 5 grants and maybe get one of them, and it will be the smallest of them. We're not a community that necessarily is teed up in that way for these large municipal funds that always come out. And so I just want to make sure that we have some path for success around this at all scale and levels without putting too much work on our little community to try and lift it up.
One of the things I'd be looking for, Rami, is, in applying for these grants, I do know that community one-stop expression of interest is a big deal, particularly with downtown initiative grants that are rolling out, and some of the newer ones. What would be our priorities? I mean, I've talked to the downtown initiative people prior to COVID. And, at that time, they were saying that we're the window dressing at the end of your project, not in the early stage. And I'm getting the feeling that maybe that's changed with COVID, but, I would rely upon, your recommendations on whether or not that would be something that we would even tackle in a community one-stop expression of interest. Maybe with COVID, that it's now in the forefront and it's not the window dressing at the end. It's something that, like as Kirby's suggesting, low-hanging fruit, and getting those SMEs to come in and do the technical assistance for our, like I think at the grant that they had in years past was pick 3 or 4 businesses, and we'll walk in and we'll consult with them and make recommendations as to how they can improve their business, right? The facade, the interior of the business, that sort of thing. And that was something that economic development was interested in pursuing, but we were discouraged to do that at this point. So I would definitely would love to get your input as to the hierarchy of the grants. What are the best ones that we should be looking for that we have the best chance of getting?
Well, I think you may be right. It sounds, at least in our discussions with Downtown Initiative, that they're quite keen to start funding some of these projects as soon as they're, I mean, we had an interesting conversation with someone today who literally said words to that effect. So it could be that, you know, there's a recognition now that those things that were considered the window dressing actually might be an achievable project today to kind of change perceptions about downtowns, which has, and if you're trying to sort of fund 231 communities at the same time, that is achievable.
The question that I have, and maybe it's out of the scope of this project, but in listening to your presentation, a lot of it was focused on the village center, which I agree has to be. But I didn't hear a lot of discussion about capitalizing on the lake region, capitalizing on a business district, you know, light manufacturing, or you know, even farming, or and that type of thing. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on maybe a little bit of a broader scope look and recommendation.
I mean, Paul, you're right. Our remit really was, our limit of work was specifically the village center. We looked at ways, you know, to try to incorporate the magnificent trails that you have, you know, going all over the sort of larger municipal area, and it's just a harder, that's why we thought the rail trail was something that was sort of achievable and directly kind of relevant to this area. The light industry is a little, you know, it's sort of adjacent. There's part of it that is adjacent to our area, but I think the connection there would be through the DPW site.
Thank you.
Other thoughts from folks? And also too, after the meeting, I'll make sure that I follow up with everyone so that they have everybody's contact information. So if there's anything folks think of after the fact that they want to plop in, that can happen. I think my only other thing that popped into my head was just around, and I think this goes to your point a little bit, Paul, around some of the wayfinding signs and how we get folks to understand like where downtown is. You know, those of us that are here know that it's here, but because it's not a corridor that people are traveling purposely always. You know, how do we get folks to kind of come into our downtown? And I know that's something that we've been thinking about, struggling with, and trying to understand better how we can do that. So we've got just a few minutes left. Other thoughts from folks?
Thought it was an excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. We are always, you know, please get in touch if something occurs to you the minute after we hang up, or tomorrow. We're always happy to hear from you. I believe you have our emails, and my cell phone. I think you have them. I'll put it in the chat right now.
And again, just to reiterate, if there are any businesses that would make sense for us to speak to directly, we're happy to engage them, even if it's just short and casual. like Rami mentioned, any information we can get is useful.
Perfect. All right, so I'll just encourage folks to keep the conversation going. And I think, Bill and Rosemary and Brian, just making sure that we're not duplicating resources anywhere, because I know we've got a couple of other smaller projects going on. So, I want things to make sure that they're complementary as we're moving forward and that we're not crashing into things anywhere too. So that we're spreading out as much as we can.
Yeah, and Kirby, I'd like to take this opportunity to apologize for not being at the meeting when the sign project was discussed and okayed. I had to meet with my tax accountant because I was at the limit on the time. So I ended up filing for an extension, so it worked out all right. But anyway, sorry about that.
No worries, Phil.
Well, before we sign off, I want to thank you guys. You've done a tremendous amount of work. I mean, from a personal perspective, I think, you're hitting all the highlights of, of things that economic development's been talking about for a long time. And it's great to hear consultants and professionals say, hey, yeah, no, we agree with you. Or even for the business owners, when they see this presentation, when the public sees it, it's confirmation of what they believe are the improvements that need to happen downtown, and certainly will help when we do apply for those grants, because they always ask, what's your proof? What's your supporting information in order to apply, and the community engagement that's required, that they want to see that the town has undertaken.
Thank you all for having us.
From anybody, I will let you guys close out.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you all
Thank
very much.
you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. And I appreciate everyone taking the time.
To Kirby, thanks for putting this together.
Hey, thank you.
Hey, Brian.
Thank you. Hey, Bill.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good night.